to order and welcome everybody to the 13th meeting of the Special Joint Committee on the Declaration of Emergency created pursuant to the order of the House of March 2nd, 2022 and the Senate of March 3rd, 2022. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House and Senate orders. I'm muffled. Okay. My microphone, okay. Well, I do appreciate that. How is it now? Little microphone check. I'm seeing this in the background. Is there a way to turn this down a little bit?
I hope not to talk this meeting.
Okay, I'll try one more time. Okay, let's try this. How does this sound? Okay, is that still? Wow. We are having a bit of a technical difficulty. I'm going to suspend the meeting for just 3 minutes to get this set up. Thank you. To the 13th meeting of the Special Joint Committee on the Declaration of Emergency, created pursuant to the order of the House March 2nd, 2022, and the Senate on March 3rd, 2022. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House and the Senate. Should any technical issues arise, as just happened, whether it be through interpretation or on the floor or virtually, then I would advise folks to let me know as soon as possible so that I can suspend for a few minutes to ensure that all members are able to participate fully. Witnesses should also be aware that translation is available through the globe icon at the bottom of their screen. We have with us today Sergeant-at-Arms and Corporate Security Officer of the House of Commons, Mr. Patrick MacDonald. We have from Parliamentary Protective Service, Acting Director, Mr. Larry Brookson, and from the Senate and Director of Corporate Security, Ms. Julie Lacroix. You will each have 5 minutes for opening remarks. Mr. MacDonald, we will start with you. I should let you know that if I gently intervene, it will be because your time is up. And I will also just put a bit of a thought out there that when the members have their time in the rounds of question, if you hear the members from time to time gently intervene, it's not poor manners. They're just trying to get to the next question. So they may reclaim their time and ask the next question. Please don't take that as a personal affront to your intervention. So with that being said, we will now proceed with the opening remarks.
I'm here in my capacity as the Sergeant at Arms of the House of Commons.
Stands that I'll be careful speaking openly about sensitive security matters. Security matters, when discussed before the Board of Internal Economy, are legislatively mandated under the Parliament of Canada Act to be discussed in camera. Some information, if made public, could increase the vulnerability of the House of Commons security posture, the parliamentary buildings, parliamentarians, and other persons within the parliamentary precinct. As head of the Office of the Sergeant at Arms and Corporate Security, my team works in close collaboration with its partners to provide a secure environment for members of Parliament, employees, and visitors on the Hill. Working with the Parliamentary Protective Service and the Senate Corporate Security, we adapt our practices proactively and continuously while also responding to evolving security risks. We collaborate closely with our partners, both on and off the Hill, for a coordinated security approach. Je le répète.
I repeat, our main concern has been to ensure the safety of our members. We know that prevention and early intervention can limit the escalation of threats and harm to them. As I mentioned, I am pleased to appear before you. That said, I hope that members of the committee will understand that there is only so much information I can share publicly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those remarks. We will now move on to Mr. Brookson. Mr. Brookson, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, honourable senators and members of Parliament. My name is Larry Brookson. I am the Acting Director for the Parliamentary Protective Service, an organisation created by Parliament in 2015 as a result of legislative amendments to the Parliament of Canada Act. Our raison d'etre is to provide physical security operations for the whole of the parliamentary precinct. Each day, our dedicated team of protection officers and dedicated specialists proudly serve and protect parliamentarians, staff, and visitors. Pour atteindre nos objectifs,
To reach our objectives, we work in close collaboration with our parliamentary security partners from the Senate and the House of Commons, as well as with police services and national intelligence agencies. These relations are of key importance for us.
since the important work of the Joint Committee, is focused on events and circumstances related to the government's decision to invoke the Emergency Measures Act, I should note that PPS, as a parliamentary entity and a non-government organization, had no role in providing direction or advice to government with respect to its decision to evoke the Emergencies Act. Cela dit, j'espère.
Having said that, I hope that my comments will help advance your collective work, and please know that I will be happy to answer any questions you may have about the workings of the PPS. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Thank you very much, and we will now provide the floor to Ms. Lacroix. Ms. Lacroix, you do have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Good evening, Senators and members of the House of Commons. My name is Julie Lacroix, and I'm the Director of Corporate Security for the Senate of Canada. Thank you for inviting me this evening. I'm appearing before your committee as part of your ongoing work to examine the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. À titre d'information,
By way of background, it might be helpful to provide the committee some context as to the role I play and that of my directorate in the context of security and the work we do to support the Speaker, Senators, and Senate staff.
the Clerk of the Senate, and I'm accountable to the Standing Committee on Internal Economy, Budgets and Administration, CIBA, for all corporate security matters. I'm responsible for programs and services that range from security accreditation to business continuity management, security project management, technical and physical security systems and infrastructure, security assessments and briefings for Senate and parliamentary travel, administrative reviews and investigations, fire prevention, Senate parking, and locksmith services, just to name a few. Along with my counterpart at the House of Commons, Mr. McDonnell, we represent both speakers as co-chairs of the Committee on the Use of Parliament Hill, and I manage the administration of that program on behalf of both speakers. Je suis également la conseillère.
I am also the principal security advisor to the Speaker and of the Senate and to SIBA on any security-related matters that are within their areas of responsibility.
La sécurité institutionnelle du Sénat n'a pas le mandat d'assurer les opérations de la sécurité physique.
However, the Senate's Corporate Security Directorate does not have a mandate to provide physical security operations on Parliament Hill. That responsibility falls to the Parliamentary Protective Service, led by Mr. Brookson.
During the convoy and demonstrations in the downtown core of Ottawa, my role as director was to maintain regular communication with relevant security partners for the purpose of assisting the Senate's decision-making in respect of 4 key things. First, to ensure that access to the precinct remain unimpeded for the Speaker, Senators, and staff. To provide briefings, advice, and guidance to the Speaker, SIBA, and to decision makers, and to provide regular updates on the security situation, and lastly, when necessary, to instruct the Senate and its employees to work from home and to avoid the downtown core of Ottawa. Finally, the committee should know that I did not receive any prior notification of the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Il me ferait plaisir.
I am happy to take any questions from the members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you to all of the opening statements. We will now open the floor to Mr. Motz for a 5-minute round. Mr. Motz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, witnesses, for being here, and most importantly, thank you for the work that you and your departments do, and your services do for the Parliamentary Precinct and those who work in it. By all accounts, the trucker convoy was organized well in advance. They reached out to city officials attempting to coordinate, well in advance. I said weeks in advance. Did you, either one of Mr. Brookson or Mr. McDonnell, did you have any contact with organizers of the convoy itself ahead of them arriving here?
I did not.
Nor did I.
And what about with the police service? Did you have any conversations with them in the weeks leading up to their arrival here?
Larry was the contact point
Okay.
for the Ottawa Police.
Yeah, so ongoing conversations leading up as to how things started to come in from information and intelligence in order for us to commence our preparations. So there's always open dialogue with the partners.
Mr. McDonnell, this is related to you and for you. Kevin Vickers, who is a well-known, you're a former boss and a well-known sergeant at arms and a well-respected law enforcement officer of many, many years. He's had some things to say about the convoy and the response to the convoy, and I just want to review a couple of those. He's called it the Canadian way, and he said that we solve these things through a measured approach, the Canadian way, dealing with public order and civil disobedience. It is a problem-solving model that includes all stakeholders: listening, education, communication, facilitation, and enforcement, but it's founded upon respecting the dignity of all people. Bringing these facilitators and stakeholders who have a mandate and responsibility to resolve the issue together, sit down and try to talk to come up with solutions and a compromise. Now, he also went on, and he made many other comments. He said, the Canadian way involves recognizing, accommodating, and reconciling differing perspectives and interests through informed, respectful debate and compromise. He also said that enforcement alone is always degrees of loss, simplistic view of the rule of law. So it's naive to think that this was going to be at all resolved through enforcement. He went on to say that, my friends, there is another way. Enforcement, how is that working for you? Enforcement means degrees of losing for everyone. We are better than this, Canada. Respect, dialogue, understanding, and empathy. He also said, respect actually means listening to something you'd rather not hear, and listening must include the possibility of recognizing there may be a meaningful grievance on the other side. Now, I know that, and I respect the position you're in. I'm not asking you specifically to weigh in on what could or should have been done, but these comments come from an individual that I know you respect and has a position. Can you provide any comments to us on that position and your view of the response to the emergencies, or the protest and the invocation of the Emergencies Act?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Kevin was a respected police officer. I was a police officer for 31 years, and I've met lots of colleagues, worked with many who I respected, but there's always a variance of opinion, and many have expressed their opinions about different incidents, occurrences in different forms. I'll let Kevin's comments speak for himself. I will not weigh in on them.
I will, because it appears obvious to me and to millions of Canadians that the convoy protest could have been concluded much differently than what it was by the Prime Minister and his government. Rather than having a heavy-handed approach with the invocation of the Emergencies Act, this protest could have been resolved through significantly sooner had they only been shown some respect, offered some dignity, and actually been listened to, something that maybe the Prime Minister and the ministers didn't want to hear. Had they done that, I think that they may have heard a meaningful grievance from the other side, and the situation, in all probability, could have been resolved significantly sooner without the enforcement action. But thank you for your comments. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moss. We will now hand the floor over to Mr. Nackby. Mr. Nackby, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll be, of course, addressing the witnesses through you. Let me first of all start by also extending my gratitude to all the members of Parliamentary Protective Service for their incredible job they do every day to keep this place safe, and especially during the very difficult time during the occupation. Let me just start broadly from the aspect of protests. We often witness peaceful protests that takes place on Parliament Hill. Can you just, in general terms, give us the process that people have to go through in order to be able to protest at the Hill?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your question. There is a process to make application for use of the Hill, as Ms. Lacroix stated in her opening remarks. That's governed through both speakers, through herself and Mr. McDonnell. My only comment is that the service ensures that there's safe and open demonstrations. There's demonstrations that happen every day, and that's where the service trains itself to ensure that those that want to come to Parliament Hill can and be safe in a safe environment to do so.
Was the process followed in the instance of the convoy protest that we are discussing in this particular committee?
I'm not alive or aware of any submission of a permit request to protest during that time.
Thank you. And in your experience and the experience of PPS, would you categorize the protests that we saw as safe or peaceful?
It had moments of concern.
Can you elaborate on that, please?
As the acting director it's my role in leading the organization to ensure that parliamentarians, staffers, and members of the public have a safe place to come to work. It's also my job to look at what's happening, particularly on the exterior, and to ensure that proper posture is in place to ensure the safety of parliamentarians. I've said before, during those days of the occupation, I had some concerns about safety, particularly on our parliamentarians crossing Wellington Street and coming up to West Block. I was happy in the end that nothing major came to play, but it's one of those things that I will always have to err on the side of caution when it comes to protecting Parliament.
I'll pose this question to all three of you, and if you have all of you can answer this question in my limited time, is that in your experience and the experience of Parliamentary Protective Services or its predecessors, have you ever seen a protest of the magnitude and the nature that we witnessed in January and February of this year? Start with Mr. McDonald.
No.
Mr. Brookson? No. Ms. Lacroix?
No.
So it was a quite unique event. How concerned were you for the safety of PPS officers who are responsible to keep all of us and the staff safe?
Every day I had that concern of safety for my protection officers.
Was that a live issue that was discussed among the leadership?
Every advancement that we do at delivering the mandate takes everything into consideration, including the safety of our protection officers and staff.
You, Mr. Brookson, in your comments, you mentioned that the mandate of PPS is to protect member staff and visitors. Let me focus on visitors. Were you concerned for the safety of visitors who are usually frequent Parliament Hill?
During that time of the occupation, there were moments where we had to close down access for certain moments. It was never a closure that was extended for an infinite. It was a finite period of time just until the concern that I may or may not have at that moment was alleviated.
Were there visitors who were visiting Parliament Hill during that period?
I'm not aware of any visitors that were attending to Parliament during that time.
Do you had reports filed by members of staff of harassment and intimidation during the occupation?
So I'll defer that to Mr. McDonnell because that's where the complaints or notifications of that would have come in.
From staff as well?
Yeah, we had lots of complaints from staff, so many that they stopped filing them to just speak with their manager.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is the time. At this moment, we will provide Mr. Rial 5 minutes pour toi. Mr. Rial?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, all three of you. Of course, your presence here and the information you share is very important for the work we're undertaking here, and all three you carried out very significant responsibilities when it comes to security on Parliament Hill during these events. What I understand is as follows. You started having discussions about this incident maybe a week or two before the blockade on Wellington Street happened. Am I right to understand it this way? Yes, you're right. When you had this information or this concern, security concern, did you have a discussion with members of the Prime Minister's cabinet? No, at no point in time. Who did you talk to about the security concerns?
My accounts on how, je m'excuse, je veux utiliser mon...
I apologize, I'll switch to English.
Any change to the posture or any briefings are up through me to both administrations. My direction comes from both speakers, and that's who I'm accountable to.
Okay, donc vous avez eu des discussions.
So you had discussions with the speakers of the Senate and the House of Commons. Not directly, but I provided them with updates. Who did you provide the updates to? With Mr. McDonnell and Ms. Lacroix. So the discussions you had, you were only in contact with Mr. McDonnell and Ms. Lacroix. Am I understanding this right? Did you at any point in time ask for security assessments to verify the scope of the incident that was taking place, just to understand if it was going to be worse than what you were expecting? Is this a thing? Do you do these sorts of assessments or verifications?
We were aware of the scope, and I think a lot of people watching or in this room are aware of the scope. I mean, it was live on national television, what was approaching Ottawa. We started monitoring that on the 11th of January. And
Okay, je m'excuse, Monsieur McDonald.
I apologize, Mr. McDonnell. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have no other option. Maybe I asked my question the wrong way. I was wondering if you received assessments, security assessments from outside partners, security experts, or others in the field. No? Okay. Did you receive any legal opinions at any point in time about the interventions that could be or couldn't be done with the events unfolding? So you did not ask for these opinions and you did not receive any. So what I understood is as follows. The incident were more serious, more grave than what you were initially estimating them to be. Am I right to say that? Our role was to assess the threats and the risks when it comes to the access for our parliamentarians, their security, and the security of their staff. So for the Senate, we kept the access possible for senators and staff. Maybe I did not ask the question in the right way once again. Were the events were harder to take care of or harder to control than what you were expecting, or was it at the scope of what you were expecting?
Information that was coming up was that this was going to be a 3-day event. So that in itself is not necessarily a concern. Obviously, what became a concern is when vehicles start to present themselves on Wellington, which is the right down the heart of both administrations. The reality for me is I didn't know what was in those vehicles, and I had no means to verify what was in those vehicles. So that was a constant security concern for me throughout the days of the occupation.
Donc,
So your answer is actually yes. So what happened was harder to manage than what you were initially estimating them to be, because it went on for longer than 3 days, and you did not know that Wellington Street could be shut off.
That none of the occupation touched the precinct directly. The precinct does not include Wellington Street.
Thank you. The time is up, and if I could, Monsieur Fortin, I will pass the floor to you and start my time, and I'll make sure that my time is at 5 minutes correctly. So we will go through the acting chair, Mr. Fortin, and I would like to continue on with that line of questioning. Would you be willing to share any written and ongoing threat assessments as they evolved with this committee for the purpose of us having a better understanding of how it evolved from your perspective in writing?
For that, Mr. Chair, I would defer that to the law enforcement partners who would have had that information within.
Was there no, through you, Mr. Chair, internal communications as to the evolving nature of the threat? Would you not have reported to your superiors about how you viewed the threat assessment on the Hill as it evolved?
Those would have been through my own concerns.
Sure.
What I
and
was
would you be
seeing.
willing to present those to this committee for our consideration?
Yes, I'm sure I could go back. I mean, there was nothing in formal writing that was presented here. A lot
No,
of
but
this.
there likely would have been emails and assessments, would there not have been? After it went beyond 3 days, for instance, I'm sure there would have been a concern when you saw Wellington Street, although adjacent to the precinct, having a direct implication on the work of the Hill.
Well, it's important to be clear on this one, Mr. Chair, is that there was never anything that directly implicated the precinct, with the exception of what was happening on Wellington Street.
That's a pretty large exception. Would you have been or received any of the communications that were happening between the National Capital Commission and the City of Ottawa and the Ottawa Police as it related to Wellington Street?
No,
None at all?
no.
So there was no coordinated effort in the early stages or throughout this process that would have included your protective services working in coordination with law enforcement?
No, Mr. Chair, because we're not a law enforcement service, but we're not peace officers, so no.
And so perhaps, Mr. McDonnell, would you have received, in your capacity as Sergeant-at-Arms, any information relating to the ongoing evolving threat that was presented outside the precinct?
No.
No. And in your opinion, is that a concern for you in retrospect? Would it have been better for your service to be able to provide better security and intelligence within the precinct, given what was identified as an unknown threat in terms of cars parked, incendiary devices, or canteens of gasoline walking to and fro? Would, in your opinion, would it be a recommendation that the precinct and the protective services be involved in these types of potential security threats?
Mr. Chair, only if there was a direct link to the precinct.
Would you agree that Wellington Street is a direct link to the precinct?
And not a direct link.
So if MPs, as you've reported, were being harassed and their transportation to and from work, I'll share with you myself, I stayed home. That is a breach, a prima facie breach of my parliamentary privilege to not feel safe on the Hill. So I'll put the question through you, Mr. Chair. Is it your responsibility to keep members of Parliament safe on the Hill?
On the Hill, yes.
So if there are activities surrounding the Hill, let me put this question to you another way. Do you believe that you would have a greater opportunity to keep the Parliament precinct safe if the precinct extended to Wellington Street?
Yes.
Would it be your recommendation that the Hill, in its security recommendations back to Parliament, that the precinct be extended to include the arteries that would perhaps obstruct the coming and going of parliamentarians to and from the Hill?
Yes.
Do you have any other recommendations that you would be willing to share with this committee on safety? Both, I'll start with Mr. McDonnell first, and then Mr. Brookson and Ms. Lacroix, if you'd like to answer. Do you have any other high-level recommendations that you'd like put forward to this committee at this moment?
Other than the Wellington Street, which is under study now, and I'm authorized by the Board of Internal Economy to be part of a working group. And as I said, it's a study in progress, and our final report has yet to be tabled. And there may be some other security recommendations within that report by the time we table it, but I'm not at liberty to speak to it at this
Okay,
time.
would you agree then, would you prefer that you would have a greater input, at least insight into the nature of the threats that surround the precinct, even if it doesn't include the precinct, given the nature of our work?
Well, Mr. Chair, like security, as I said in my opening remarks, is evolving, and we're always proactively addressing it. So yeah, there's always improvements to be made, whether it's inside or outside immediate.
Did you find that not having availability of the information impacted your work?
Well, at times I knew what was going on in Wellington Street if it was imminent, but it wasn't contained in a report per se. It would be like a phone call. You may want a heads up. Your employees were going to put barriers so your employees
Unfortunately, I
can come up
have
the
to cut
stairs.
myself off.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Merci. We will now proceed with the Senate round, starting with Ms. Boniface for 5 minutes. Senator Boniface, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all three of you. I appreciate you being here. One of the I think that the public and this committee needs to understand how the workings on a day-to-day basis are with the local police service. You know my background, and police agencies work very closely together. So I'm curious when we start kind of separating out, if we're standing on one side of the pavement, we're in one jurisdiction. When we're on the other side of the pavement, it's somebody else's issue. So what would be the normal day-to-day would be my first question in your work with the Ottawa Police Service, the Municipal Police Service. And then secondly, how did it work out through that process in terms of ongoing dialogue and conversation for the protection of everybody?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Senator Boniface, thank you for your question. Today, there's been much advancement on the relationship between the service and the Ottawa Police Service, mainly due to the demobilization of the RCMP from Parliament Hill. I stand here today with the utmost confidence in that relationship that the Ottawa Police Service, as an example, we have civil authority under the criminal code for our authority to make an arrest. which means we don't have the authority to release. The relationship we have today with the Ottawa Police Services is they do the respond when the call is made, which is greatly appreciated. We're in the works right now of putting in place, we're trying to ensure that these relationships are removed from just the people that are currently in place. The MOUs have started. Right now, the Ottawa Police has the MOU with respect to Critical Incident Command. The services, we moved quickly in 2020 to establish our own Critical Incident Command program. And much of this was, nobody really knew about us, because everybody just looked at us as, what's the RCMP? So that took some time and some effort to get everybody on board. And surprisingly enough, it's been welcomed. And rest assured, the service has been built to hold the first 90 minutes of any incident, and will continue to make the necessary changes moving forward. Again, the service takes this protective mandate of Parliament, parliamentarian staffers, and members very seriously.
And I appreciate that, and I respect that as well. I think the important piece as well is to have reassurance that the working together through an MOU. And so you indicated that you've been working on an MOU. I think you testified to that at a different committee. Where are we in terms of that discussion? And how close are you to a finish line?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Senator Boniface, the last update I had from the Ottawa Police Service is that it's coming in the next few weeks. That said, there's another series of MOUs. We have, the service does a great job at also setting in its tabletop exercise framework. And we're committed to continuing those tabletop exercises with the Ottawa Police Service, with the RCMP's PMPD, our friends at both security directorates. And this is something that we'll continue to pursue to ensure that our operational readiness and response is where it needs to be. But I'm prepared to report back on the advancement of those MOUs. But I'm starting to become a pain in the rear end at the Ottawa Police Service because these things we need to advance on them.
So your sense of it is if the MOUs are in place, they will help divide out this work in a meaningful way, so that the work day to day and in a major incident like you experienced in January and February would help facilitate how the working relationships are. Because the difficulty is people vest it in people they know, but standing it in the long term is the hard part, agency to agency.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Senator Boniface, my objective here is not just to the demobilization of the RCMP, was to ensure absolute sustainability of this service. And that's a priority that I'm not going to waver from.
Okay, and can you tell me, again through the chair, can you tell me whether or not you've conducted an internal review as a result of the incident overall and the role that PPS played and how they responded?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Senator Boniface, yes, an after-action review was conducted by the service. We're just finalizing the report on that, and we'll certainly be in a position to share those findings.
I think that would be very helpful. And can you tell me in terms of and I know I'm watching my time, Mr. Chair, in terms of the attack on Parliament Hill and where you came from, those recommendations to where we are today, could you also elaborate on that as well? Because that, as you know, speaks to the preparedness for an incident like this.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Boniface. The recommendations from the OPP review have all been addressed, and I think we're at 90 percentile or there with implementation. We're trying to decouple a lot of those recommendations were steered towards the RCMP, but from a service perspective, our objective has been to transfer all of that from yellow to blue, which is the colors of the service, and that work continues as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That does conclude the 5-minute round. We will now provide 5 minutes pour Monsieur Carignan.
5 minutes for Mr. Carignan. Thank you. My question will be to Mr. Broxson. Did you have discussions with the Ottawa Police and the RCMP before the arrival of the convoy and after the arrival of the convoy?
Yes. I had several conversations with both the RCMP and 3 conversations with the Ottawa Police Service, 2 directly with Chief Slowly during the occupation.
Okay.
And what was the content or the nature of these discussions? Before and after the arrival. After the arrival of the convoy, it was about coordinating the security measures that we were putting in place to make sure that all parliamentaries will be safe.
With Chief Slowly, it was conversations on just where we might be at with rectifying the issue, which I saw witnessed every day on Wellington Street, and that was my conversations with him.
Okay.
Were you part of the integrated command center?
So we had representation at the NCRCC. To be clear, the NCRCC was more of a coordination and not the critical incident command. That was a piece that was created, I think, the third week or 2.5 weeks in, and that was between the OPP, the RCMP, and the Ottawa Police Service.
Okay.
On the 12th of February, Ottawa Police let us know through their website that they had a plan to clear the streets of Ottawa. Are you aware of this plan?
No, I was not.
Okay.
So you did not take part in the drafting of any plan to liberate the streets, tow away the trucks, and...
The city.
No, not at all. These were discussions between police services, but the PPS was not involved. This is a bit strange that you were not aware that you did not take part in this. Did you ask to have a bigger presence in these meetings, in these committees? Because, after all, it is in your principal mandate to protect the parliamentarians. So it's a bit interesting that you were not part of this.
Operations were governed and driven out by the policing partners and not the service.
I know it's not your service, but you were almost the client in all this. You were a bit of a victim as well. You were not being consulted on the methods and the tools. And during the testimony of Ms. Lacroix, she was saying that she was not informed about the declaration of the Emergencies Act, or before it was done, so you weren't consulted and you were not advised, you were not informed of it.
Wait.
You have right. Yes, you are right. Mr. Carignan.
The question, sir.
Parfait, c'est gentil.
Okay, that was very kind. Thank you. Can you let us know if you had any discussions with the two speakers on the eventual or possible declaration of the Emergencies Act? Did you have any discussions with the speakers of the Senate and the House of Commons?
Pour le Sénat,
For the Senate, we briefed the Speaker, Larry, and myself, but only within our capacity of maintaining access to parliamentarians, and we provided our recommendations. We sent instructions of not showing up to the Senate during police operations. But if you did not have any communications at the operations center and communications didn't seem to exist, how did you do that coordination then?
That we decouple being involved with the definement of the operation and then how the operation is going to roll out. So obviously when the tactical plan was being put together by the policing partners, they did keep us informed as to what those plans were going to be. And it was with that information that we kept both administrations apprised. And again, to Ms. Lacroix's point, just to ensure that any of the impact of the safe arrival or departure of our parliamentarians was always our collective objective throughout this period.
And that does conclude the 5 minutes with the additional time, Monsieur Carignan. We will now move on to Senator Harder. Senator Harder, sir, you have 5 minutes for your intervention.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for both your presentation tonight, but also through you to your respective staff who have worked throughout this period in protecting us and allowing the Parliament of Canada to continue to function. I'm struck by the testimony tonight, which was very consistent in viewing the occupation as a very unique event, not a passive, nice gathering of protesters, but a rather more tumultuous than you've experienced in the past. Was there any time in the occupation that you feared a breach of the precinct?
We actually did not have any breach of the precinct.
No, I know that. Did you ever fear that there would be a breach of the precinct?
That came around the 17th to 18th of February. My concern at that was understanding the route and how the policing operation was going to unfold. I was increasingly concerned about the next day where Parliament was going to be sitting and the route that our parliamentarians would foot traffic into West Block and understanding where the police operation could be at that time. Right. And that was the biggest concern that I had.
And in that expression of concern, did the policing authorities take into account the advice that you might have offered in assuring that parliamentarians in the passage through their authorities would transpire in a coordinated and a proper fashion?
It's important that when that level of a police operation gets put in place. My apologies through you, Mr. Chair. Senator Harder, it's really something that then gets governed on its own. What I appreciated the most from our policing partners was the information that they did share with us, which then brought me to the position of raising a concern about whether Parliament should take place on the Friday.
Yep. And I now want to go to the tail end of this period of emergency declaration. As I observed the coordinated police action, it was a classic case in how policing should take place in terms of confronting and disabling an occupation. What level of coordination was there with the precinct responsibility to ensure that as that operation proceeded, there wouldn't be an inadvertent breach of the precinct?
There were some, through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, there were some increased measures that we took by increasing the height of the fencing and what have you. That was something that I asked for specifically just in alignment with the policing operation. My concern at the time is that as the police operation pushed westbound into West Block, that it would collapse onto the precinct, which is something I wasn't prepared to permit. The good news on how that rolled out, and to your point, it was an operation that was done very well in comparison to maybe what it would have looked like 10 or 20 years ago. But there was nothing to the point outside of, again, there were times where we were having roughly 150 to 160 parliamentarians, their staffers, coming to work in this building every day.
Right. My final question or observation for your comment would be lessons learned include what we earlier discussed about expanding the precinct to incorporate Wellington and other aspects that are being looked at without specifics, and I understand that you can't talk about the specifics. Would it be helpful in your mind if this committee were to recommend in its findings an endorsement of the work that is being done to expand the protective area for Parliament?
Yes. And I think my recommendation would be to ensure that we have the necessary technology and infrastructure to allow us to close and secure the precinct when necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Harder. We now have Senator White for a 5-minute round, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to PPS for their work. It's truly appreciated. I personally have seen a dramatic shift in their capabilities since the attack on Parliament Hill. A couple of quick questions. One, were any of your offices receiving ongoing written reports from the Ottawa Police Service for that period of time when the convoy was in front of Wellington Street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not to the service, Senator.
No.
No.
You spoke to sending some information to staff and parliamentarians throughout, and I agree there was some information. I don't recall ever seeing anything come out that would make me fearful of what was happening in front of Parliament. Not that I didn't feel it, because I did feel it walking the streets and behind, but I don't remember seeing anything. Did any of you ever send anything out advising parliamentarians they may not wish to attend work, they may wish to, or directing them a specific location that they should follow to work?
I did direct senators and staff to stay home on 2 occasions.
Near the end of the occupation?
End, correct.
Not at the beginning?
No, correct.
Okay.
We did, however, in all of my communications, I did recommend to senators and staff that if they could work remotely, to do so.
Same? Go ahead, please, Patrick.
On the first few days, Senator White, we recommended certain routes onto the precinct.
Not from a driving perspective?
No, walking.
Walking, okay. Did you at any time, Superintendent, did you at any time request that the Ottawa Police Service freeze the space in front of Parliament, Wellington Street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, Senator.
At what point was that?
About a week before the arrival, my concern from the onset was filling up Wellington Street.
And what were you told?
The plan was in place, and they would leave one lane open.
That the police service stated they would leave one lane open for a protest.
Correct. For emergency transport, yeah.
And yet we do freeze that area every year for Canada Day and special occasions. So it's not that it's not something that's done. And the Ottawa Police do that every time they're requested?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, to be clear, for Canada Day, it's not for vehicles to be parked on Wellington. It's Wellington is closed down for foot traffic for people that are visiting.
No, understood. That's what I'm saying. So it's not something we never do before.
Right.
We have done this before. We've
Right.
Queen's Visit. We've frozen certain areas, particularly in front of Wellington Street previously.
Correct.
Were any of you involved in any discussions with the office of the mayor while that office was negotiating with the convoy protesters?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I attempted a call with the mayor. And at first, he had accepted my invitation. It was the same day that I had a follow-up discussion with Chief Slowly. But then my team received notification back that the mayor was not available. I tried to make notification with the city manager, Steve Kanalakis, and the same response came back.
Do you know whether or not we know the outcome of those negotiations? I think most of us have seen the letter that came from the mayor's office that later was rescinded as a result of a refusal of the convoy to follow it. Do you know if the police service or the RCMP was involved in that negotiation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any involvement by either policing.
Mr. McDonnell?
I'm not aware.
In hindsight, do you feel information was shared sufficiently between the law enforcement agencies and parliamentary precinct security, Larry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do, Senator.
You felt that sufficient information was shared?
As it was being provided to me on keeping me abreast as to what the police, not the service, to be clear, not being the service being part of the creation of the tactical response, but when that was put in place, just giving us an FYI. Case in point is keeping us abreast as to when the operation was underway. We were well informed to ensure that we needed to take the necessary measures.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chair, at any point in time, did you see our understanding is there was a removal plan pre-invocation that was to be followed, and we've heard from the RCMP speak to that. Were you able to see that plan that was going to take place the weekend prior to the invocation of the Emergency Act?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, Senator.
It wasn't shared with you?
No.
Do you think it should have been?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, Senator White, I really rely heavily on those policing partners to do what they're mandated to do and then choose to share with me. So
I'm good, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Concludes the opening round. We'll now go into the second 4-minute round, beginning with Mr. Brock. Mr. Brock, you have 4 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your attendance today and your participation in this most extremely important study. And I want to thank you for your service. I want to just do some housekeeping before I get into some more substantive issues. I want to clarify to Mr. Brookson and Mr. McDonald that neither of you personally or any member of your staff had requested the invocation of the act to the government. Is that correct?
through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
That's correct.
And I understand, Mr. Brookson, that you testified at a previous committee, I believe in June of 2022, that you're quoted as saying that there was no benefit whatsoever in the invocation of the Emergencies Act for the services, for your service. And that's a statement that you stand by today. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, correct.
Thank you. To Mr. Brookson, in that same previous testimony, you stated that you were, quote, flabbergasted that activities that could constitute criminal activity was happening right in front of law enforcement. The former chief of the Ottawa Police Service, Mr. Peter Slowly, issued a warning through the press hours before the truckers arrived on January the 28th that any protesters who break the law would be prosecuted. He stated, and I quote, "Let me be very clear. We are prepared to investigate, arrest if necessary, charge and prosecute anyone who acts violently or breaks the law in the demonstrations or in association with the demonstrations." Notwithstanding those strong words, you and your staff witnessed the complete opposite while law enforcement stood by and allowed those activities to occur. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's one point of clarification. I would never use the term flabbergasted. That would fall to my colleague, Mr. McDonnell.
My apologies.
You notice how he's quiet now, right? He's not opening up his mic. Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, the decisions of the Ottawa Police Service during that time remains to the Ottawa Police Service and the subsequent police board that was in charge of that service at the time.
To Mr. McDonald, you used that word flabbergasted?
Yes.
This was in the presence of cruisers, this was in the presence of uniformed officers and ununiformed officers, correct?
I didn't witness any police and civilian attire, but what was happening every day, our employees were being harassed, and I think the flabbergasted comment was relative to the entrance that we made into our parking lots in front of the Supreme Court. And we had employees pulling in and out of there every day. And there was banging on the cars. And there was a police cruiser within a sight, a police cruiser witnessing it, and nobody exiting the police
And this was
cruiser.
reported to the, I believe,
was,
the Ottawa Police Service almost on a daily basis. Is that correct?
I don't know on a daily basis. I think we gave up at a certain point and Larry put a car down there.
And did you speak directly with former Chief Slowly about
No,
this
I did
issue?
not.
All right. You'll agree with me that there was a suggestion by the government that the silly words used by some of the protesters, that they were trying to overthrow the government and speak with the Governor General and have a new form of government to take over this country. I put that to Justice Lametti when he testified earlier at this committee. He thought that was a silly statement. Did either of you take that as a serious threat to national security?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I did not.
Mr. McDonald?
That started in January 2019. James Bowder with his convoy. He didn't gain much traction, and no, I didn't take that comment seriously.
Thank you.
That does conclude the 4 minutes. We will now pass the floor to Ms. Bendayan. Ms. Bendayan, you have 4 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing before us today. I'll go quite quickly, given that time is limited. Mr. Brookson, you indicated that at no time was the precinct breached, but isn't it true that you were blocking access to Parliament Hill? I came to the chamber every single day during the convoy, and I was instructed to go through a very specific entry point, at which point I had to present ID. So isn't it true that you actually blocked access to the precinct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. During times of heightened security measures, there's going to be some heightened restrictions, and my apologies if there was any sort of element of you feeling that you were blocked from coming to work. The service does what it can at doing what it needs to do. We continue to work, and I know we had to augment and shift points of entry that we felt was the safest for our parliamentarians.
But that's in part why there was no breach of the precinct, because you, in fact, blocked access to the precinct. And you mentioned earlier that you didn't know what was in the vehicles that were on Wellington Street. You actually testified before the Proc Committee that there was a technology gap, and I'm quoting here. You stated it was considered to be unsafe for some of those members to walk through that street and sense vehicles. And so can you be a little bit more precise as to what your concern was? What could have been in those vehicles?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So for me, it's just not knowing what's in those vehicles is what concerns me, without having to have a sense of the specificity. My request in previous testimony was it's not a specialty that the service itself has to do the checking of what vehicles are. That was a request that I made to one of the partners.
And Mr. McDonald, you stated in connection to the vehicles on Wellington Street, and I quote, "We voiced our frustration with what was happening. It was almost a daily occurrence." And so you voiced your frustration to the police of jurisdiction. Is that right?
We went back through Larry. Our employees were calling in. They weren't getting any sort of response. So they would take their complaints through you, Mr. Chair, excuse me, take their complaints to their managers.
But nothing happened.
Nothing ever happened. The police posture was on the outside of the demonstration. They were never on the inside of the demonstration, so there's no police officer to be seen.
Thank you. And on Friday, February 18th, I did come to the Hill. I wanted to be in the House of Commons, and I was actually stopped by your staff and escorted home. I was not allowed to attend the House of Commons on Friday, February 18th. Can you explain why? Again, in specific terms, what was the security threat on February 18th?
Mr. Chair. The security threat of that day was the commencement of the police operation that was going to walk right down Wellington Street. I had hoped that that would have been cleared prior to the 18th, so the evening of the 17th, but for reasons unknown to me, the policing operation was halted.
And so, in effect, did the convoy stop the functioning of democracy temporarily in this country, in your opinion?
What I do know is the recommendation from me to the administration was to suspend Parliament for the 18th.
Because it was unsafe?
I felt it was unsafe, yeah.
Thank you.
We will now go on to the 3-minute rounds with Monsieur Fortin. You have 4 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you allow me, Mr. Broxson, I want to continue where you left off in your presentation. You were saying that the operations could be compromised, but starting from when? When did you feel that there was a certain danger for people on the Parliament Hill?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would have been around the 18th of February is the date that 18th was the Friday, I believe. The 17th, or the evening of, was the commencements of the police operation, but the operation commenced at the outside of the perimeter of the downtown core, and it was suspended that evening. It was the 18th, or the day of, that it was going to be coming through Wellington and clearing out, understanding what I wasn't alive to, understanding what a police operation of that magnitude could trigger off with those that were involved, and remaining.
Je m'excuse, monsieur.
I understand, but So starting from the 18th, that is the case. But before the 18th, at no point in time did you feel that the security of the individuals on Parliament Hill were in danger?
There was, just to be clear to the committee, and I've expressed this to the policing partners, the threshold for me is much lower at maintaining security within the precinct. What I was seeing that was happening on Wellington Street and the massive police operation to clear Wellington Street, understanding the level of foot traffic of our parliamentarian staffers that come to work, that was the consideration I took in making the recommendation.
L'occupation.
But the occupation started on the 28th of January, and from then until the 18th of February, I'm not questioning your judgment, but I'm just trying to understand, at no point in this period, in your opinion, was the security of people on Parliament Hill compromised?
I didn't have the same level of concern of shutting it down or blocking.
Okay. Vous êtes d'accord avec...
So you would agree with me when I say that we work at different places on Parliament Hill. We are in Wellington Building, West Block. We go to the Confederation Building on the other side of Bank Street. We go to the Prime Minister's office. Well, they have an office there. So there are a certain number of buildings around the Parliament where parliamentarians can go in to work for different reasons, committees, offices, etc. And you're in charge of security of all these people at all times, if I understand correctly, in these buildings too, or is it only when they're in West Block or on Parliament Hill?
Chair, to be clear, the precinct is inside buildings, Parliament Hill, and that's it. So sidewalks, Wellington Street, any of the side streets is not part of the precinct.
That is
Parliament... okay.
unfortunate.
Merci.
I will
Thank you.
now to Mr. Fortin, and I will commence with my 3-minute round. Just without getting into specifics, in the lead up to the occupation, did you take steps to increase the personnel within the precinct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
In what range would you, just to percentage-wise, how many more officers were required?
It was an increase of roughly 30%.
And was that at its peak, or was that at the beginning?
That would have been throughout.
Okay. So, you had referenced that perhaps the threat of it being breached or there being some kind of overthrow wasn't present. After January 6th, did your organization take any steps to begin preparedness for a like scenario that might occur here in Canada, Mr. McDonnell?
After January 6th, you're referring to the United States?
Correct.
Yeah, that would be Larry's area.
Mr. Broxson?
Yes, we took steps. Again, I think I mentioned earlier the importance of the tabletop, the TTX exercising framework that the service has put in place. And that same January, we commenced tabletop exercises with our partners, which was inclusive of the Ottawa Police Service.
Okay, and when the weapons were found in Coots, you had referenced not knowing what's in the trucks. What precautions did you take to improve the safety and security of the precinct at that time? Did you elevate the threat when you found when you heard that there was a connection with weapons in Coots, or did you do nothing?
The elevation was already there.
It was already if you were to range the different levels of elevation, I don't know if you use colors or codes or whatever, at what level?
It takes me back to my ERT training, Mr. Chair, is that always add one to it. And so the establishment of what happened at Coots was exactly what my thoughts were right on Wellington Street.
That there could have been potential for weapons there.
Yep.
And so when you have did you receive any reports around ideologically motivated violent extremists and the potential for lone wolf actors?
The open source intelligence that the service does, there's always a review of the actors that are involved and what their backgrounds and what their potential ideas are.
So how would you rate that threat given the information that you had?
It would have been up there for me.
Up there, be more specific, sir.
It would have been a heightened security concern. If that type of individuals are walking down Wellington Street on a regular basis throughout that period, and I have parliamentarians that are coming to work with their staff, it's a huge concern for me.
And would you have reason to believe that there was that element within the crowd? Not to say that the entire crowd, but within that crowd, there could have been that element.
Absolutely.
And so given that and hearing the testimony, is there a possible scenario where during the police movements to disperse, that there could have been a scenario where the precinct was breached? Or in your opinion, do you feel that your service was adequately prepared to withstand the thousands of people that were out front of Parliament?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so the increased fencing that was put down the Wellington fence was in preparation and readiness for the tactical operation.
I am out of time, unfortunately, and we will continue through. Thank you for that, Mr. Brookson. We will now go on to Monsieur Carignan for 3 minutes, sir.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brookson, you were saying that you tried to reach Mayor Watson, Mayor of Ottawa. Can you tell us when was this, the date, and why did you try to reach him?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't recall the specific date, but the call I requested to have with him was in the response of opening back up Wellington Street and escorting the trucks back up onto Wellington.
Okay. Est-ce que je
So you were not satisfied with the Ottawa Police Service and you wanted to increase the pressure? Because I used to be a mayor in another life, and when people came to me, it was because they were not satisfied with something, with the services. So was it because you're insatisfied when it comes to the policing, the police services, that you wanted to reach out to Mayor Watson?
My concern when it started was the amount of vehicles already established on Wellington Street, and that was the first weekend. During the first weekend, there started to be some removal of vehicles that were leaving overnight. My discussions led with PSPC and the security partners to start establishing jersey barriers, because what I didn't want to see happen was a backfill of those vehicles that on their own initiative decided to leave. The decision by the city to, I guess, alleviate an issue in the suburbs or wherever, to let the vehicles come and just completely jam up Wellington Street was a big concern for me. Reason why I tried to reach out to the mayor.
Donc.
So you were not in agreement with the intervention strategy of the Ottawa Security Services or Ottawa Police at that point in time?
You, Mr. Chair, my responsibility is just to secure the precinct. And so my responsibility is also to take into consideration all factors. And this was one key factor that was a heightened concern for me, and we had to respond accordingly.
Donc.
So you were not on the same page. You did not agree with them. You can say it.
Yeah, correct.
Parfait.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You did have 30 seconds left, Monsieur Carignan. I don't want to shorten your time.
Ça va.
No, it's okay.
We'll allow Senator Boniface to take the floor now.
Thank you very much. I just want to, one of the perils of policing is you use acronyms. So, Mr. Brookson, when you refer to your time at ERT, can you just give a very brief description on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my apologies for the acronym. It's the Emergency Response Team. I was part of the team up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and I was also part of the A Division team responsible for the National Capital Region.
So you have some experience in terms of managing these things before you came into this role?
That experience of ERT is the heightened tactical capability and the armaments that come with that tactical capability.
And training and such like that went with that?
Correct.
Am I correct? Okay, and so when you look at protecting the precinct, I'm trying to think of recommendations going forward, protecting the precinct when you're dealing with the number of partners you do, and as we saw, number of partners who came on the scene near the end of it. Do you have any recommendations? When I hear you say a coordination center versus a critical incident operation. Do you have any sense, given your experience, on whether or not there was opportunity for that critical incident to be much earlier?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Senator Boniface, I think Madame Lacroix had mentioned as to looking forward. Anytime that both institutions are sitting, we have approximately 135 to 140 guns on the precinct. It's not what I don't need is more. What I do need more of is effective barriers and, more importantly, to Ms. Lacroix's point, technology. What I lacked the most during this period was adequate situational awareness. And that I can't rely simply on the human eye or the human asset to get me that.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good point for this committee. Appreciate it. And quickly, while I have a few minutes left, Mr. McDonnell, I was taken by your comments around the complaints, and eventually you said there were so many you quit taking them. What was the nature of the complaints generally, and how do you evaluate that as you do an internal report to think about how this should be done in the future?
Yeah, it's not that we quit taking them. The complaints were relative to what happened outside the parliamentary precinct, more specifically in and around Wellington Street. So the staff would bring it to the attention, call Ottawa Police, and there was little or no action taken. And so they just put up with the harassment and went back to their office managers.
So just to be clear, though, you're referring to harassment of your staff.
Harassment of the staff, yes.
By those who would have been
on the street
protesting. Okay. And so, in terms of long-term effect, on your staff, and it's a prolonged event, and we know that it is impact.
Yeah, there's some that are still affected by it, and if you go around and speak with shopkeepers and people working in the restaurants, they're still affected by it also.
Okay.
At this time, I think, given the ongoing rounds, we're going to take a 5-minute recess for refreshment. And then when we come back, just to let folks know, we're going to reset. So there'll be a 5-minute round followed by a 4-minute, 3-minute split like we've just done. Okay, so we'll be back in 5 minutes. We will begin the 5-minute round with Mr. Motts. Mr. Motts, you have 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. McDonnell and Mr. Brookson, I'd like to each get your perspective on, with your background in policing experience and the cooperation required to deal with an incident that occurred here January, February, what lessons are to be learned from the policing response during this particular convoy, from your perspective, because it impacts us here. So from your perspective, what learning should we be looking at?
As a former police officer and in charge of protective operations, assistant commissioner at one point, I would say listen to your intelligence, listen to your experts, and set it up, your posture, set it up days out, and set it up right.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I echo the comments of Mr. McDonnell. I think, with respect to the Ottawa Police Service, we can sense the change on just how the Panda game, for instance, is going to be addressed. And you go back 1 year as to how the choice was back then, and it wasn't well. So I'm very pleased and happy with the changes that seem to be occurring at the Ottawa Police Service. And so I'm looking at that as an extreme positive moving forward.
Thank you for that. And Chair, I'm going to try and share some time with Mr. Brock because I know they probably won't get to the second round of this. Mr. Brooks, and you provided testimony here that the weeks before the convoy arrived, that you guys the PPS asked for Wellington Street to be frozen, to not have vehicle access to it, which tells me that obviously there had to be contact between the convoy organizers and the City of Ottawa or the Ottawa Police Service. Would that be your assessment as well? And the direction that the reason the convoy ended up on front of the Parliament on Wellington is because of the permissions given by the City and by the Ottawa Police Service? Would that be a fair assessment?
That would be a fair assessment, I'm sure.
Okay. So also, and with both your experiences, you know that in many of the protests that occur, whether here on Parliament Hill or in other parts of the country or even the globe, that there will be those who have extremist views, who have nothing to do with the actual protest itself, attach themselves to that and try to either fly under the radar under that protest protection or propagate their own agendas separate from that of the protest. And we've seen that in Coots. The people involved with the firearms in Coots had nothing to do with the protest. Would that be a fair assessment from both of your experiences with this particular situation as well as the, in their circumstances?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be correct.
Mr. McDonnell?
Yeah, I don't have first-hand information of who was in the crowd, although I will agree that it's common that radical groups will attach themselves to lawful protests.
Okay.
But in this particular instance, I'd have no first-hand knowledge.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to Mr. Rock.
Thank you. Gentlemen, you previously responded to a few of my colleagues, particularly you, Mr. Brookson, about your heightened concerns regarding the unknown in the vehicles and in the trucks. And you indicated that heightened concern was rather high without putting an actual number on it. And that continued largely throughout the entire protest until it was disbanded. Can you share with me whether or not you received any intelligence reports from any police service or CSIS that either confirmed your suspicions or simply dispelled that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no.
No?
I did not receive any direct information to suggest otherwise.
And I know that you specifically, because you testified about this in June, you testified that you wrote or you spoke to the RCMP and you requested CBRNE sensing to be conducted within days of the arrival of these truckers, and the RCMP did not comply with that request. And the reason for that was?
Security concerns for the individuals. We're not talking about police officers that would conduct that assessment. We're talking about civilians, and it was deemed to be unsafe.
That does conclude the end of the 5 minutes. We will now move on to Mr. Varani. Mr. Varani, you have 5 minutes, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to all three of our presenters, and thank you for your service in keeping the parliamentary precinct safe. It's very, very important. We've taken you back to a lot of testimony, and Mr. McDonald, I want to take you back to some testimony that you provided at the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs on June 21st. And it dovetails with some of what you've been asked presently, where you're talking about instances of cars being banged on. And I'm going to read you back what you said at that time. One individual would block certain employees' cars every day. If it was a female employee, he would bang on their car before moving aside. We had one instance when, just before coming up the steps off Wellington, a female employee was accosted by a gentleman who tried to throw a bag of what appeared to be human feces on her. A male employee came to her rescue and pushed the assailant to the ground, and they left. Do you recollect giving that testimony, Mr. McDonald? Yes. Mr. McDonald, I want to ask you something that's directed at a question that I think was put directly to Mr. Brookson, and I think Ms. Lacroix answered it a bit later. But it was this idea about policing, and we understand your jurisdiction ends at Wellington. At least for the PPSA, it ends at Wellington. And it was put to your two colleagues on the panel that expanding the precinct beyond Wellington would assist in terms of keeping parliamentarians safe. Do you agree with that type of recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, and now I want to take you, Mr. Brookson, to something that Mr. Brock was just touching on, and it was this idea about sort of just tell me, if we take it from first instance, when we're outside right now and we're trying to get in onto the parliamentary precinct, there are those things that I think are called bollards, those things that come up out of the earth, right? It's pretty cool for a guy that isn't familiar with bollards, but those are there to prevent vehicles from accessing the precinct, right? Okay, and that's because vehicles can be dangerous, right? And vehicles can be dangerous because of the fact that they're a vehicle, right? Or so the witness, he's nodding in assent. But they can also be dangerous for what's inside the vehicles, potentially. Is that fair?
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct. Vehicles can be weaponized.
Okay, and we know that they've been weaponized in terrorist incidents around the planet. Right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct.
And terrorist incidents, in fact, in Canada. Vehicles have been used to strike down people.
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct.
And going back to Mr. Brock's question, you actually put a specific request into the RCMP to do this chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive detection test, and they did not do that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the reason that they explained to you is that their agents, or the people that do this specific test, didn't feel safe accessing the vehicles.
Correct.
And that goes back to what Mr. McDonald said, because a lot of the policing was taking place outside of the actual blockade as opposed to within the blockade, because law enforcement agents didn't feel safe inside the blockade itself. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can't speak on how the police of the Ottawa Police Service or any other serving agency that was there as to how they felt, whether they felt safe or not.
Okay. And I guess if you're faced with that sort of situation, I mean, you guys are the law enforcement experts, not me, but if you can't figure out what's in the vehicles, I guess one of the other options is to just move the vehicles.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the option is not letting them on in the first place.
Fair enough, but they were there, and we can explore that. And I just want to make sure we're crystal clear on your testimony. It was that to Mr. Senator White that you had actually suggested a freeze of Wellington 1 week prior to the blockaders arriving in Ottawa, and that request that you put to the Ottawa Police Service was effectively rebuffed.
Correct. Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Right. So now that we've got a situation where the vehicles are on the territory, you can't find out what's in the vehicles. Then I guess your only option is to try and have the vehicles removed from the territory as a means of keeping
through you,
the
Mr.
area
Chair.
safe.
The biggest challenge I had is I didn't have authority of Wellington Street.
Right. But when the Emergencies Act declaration comes into force, there are things such as towing provisions that are empowered, and those vehicles were eventually removed after the EA declaration was put in place. That's correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's how it was conducted within the policing partners, but the service had no role in that.
Okay, and just in these last 30 seconds, you talked a bit in response to questions put by Mr. Green about your concerns about potential ideologically motivated extremism, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct.
And that was informed by a bit by what you had observed at Coots, but also by what you were observing here in Ottawa. So you had a level of heightened concern about potential IMVE here in Ottawa.
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct.
And was that threat assessment heightened by virtue of what you witnessed in terms of certain flags or types of things being displayed, such as swastika flags? Would that have heightened your risk assessment?
It's important that the intelligence, the protective intelligence unit of the service does a great job, as with working with our partners, on doing that capture, that open source capture of what's the messaging, what's going back and forth. And that's the information that I'm talking about that elevates my concern as to what's happening within the precinct.
Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Broxson, if you allow me, I'll continue with you. I don't have anything against you, but I'm just trying to get all my questions through. So you were saying that you were not satisfied or you did not agree with the measures adopted by the police or municipal authorities in Ottawa when it comes to Wellington Street, and you tried to communicate with Mayor Watson on this. My question is the following. When was it? Was it before February 15th or after that you tried to do that? The occupation started towards the 28th of January. The Declaration of Emergency Act was the 15th of February, so it has to be in between the two, the time when you tried to communicate with Mayor Watson.
Chair, my recollection, I can confirm this for the committee. It was prior to the police operation of the 17th, 18th. It was the same period when the access roads were opened up by the city and additional vehicles were brought up right in front of the triad.
You are in charge of security, as you were saying, for all parliamentary buildings. So that includes West Block, where we are right now, where the Parliament sits, the Senate building, the Justice building, Confederation building, Wellington building, Victoria building, and others that I might be forgetting. So you're in charge of security in all of these buildings. Am I right to say this? Yes. And Wellington Street separates, there are others, but Wellington Street separates these different buildings. So I think you said this on a number of occasions, but just to make sure, this was one of the key challenges when it comes to the security and the work that you have to do.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, correct. And it's always important. But another concern is the SCB building.
Oui.
Again, the precinct is within the building itself, and I know there were measures taken with the City of Ottawa to make it part of the sidewalk as well. But from a security measure, for me, the sidewalk's just not good enough.
Et si
If you had been in charge of security on Wellington Street, and if the parliamentary precinct, including Wellington Street, was completely under your control, the whole hill, what would you have done starting from the 28th of January, Mr. Broxson?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the streets would have been blocked. There would have been no vehicles permitted to come up onto Wellington Street.
Et à votre avis, est-ce que ça aurait été possible?
And do you think that police services would have been able to do that, block Wellington Street?
À votre avis, je comprends.
I mean, it's about what you think about it, because you talked about your experience when it comes to security operations. Do you think this was possible on their part?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, it's not for me to speak on behalf of the Ottawa Police Service, and I'll leave that to the Ottawa Police Service to answer those.
Mais vous, en tant
But you, as an expert in security, you would have done this, right? You would have blocked Wellington. So I think my time is almost up. So, Mr. Broxson, 1 minute? Okay. Would you be okay with presenting us with a copy of the emails you exchanged and your notes, personal notes for this period of time during the events? So 28th of January to the date when the operation was completed, the 20th of February. So 28th of January to 20th of February, your emails and your personal notes. Would you be able to share those with us?
Through you, Mr. Chair, most, if not all, of my conversations were verbal and in person as to what the concerns were that I had and recommending for the suspension of Parliament. I can certainly look back and see what emails may or may not be in place and provide that to the committee.
Mais comme vous me dites,
But as you're saying, most of the time it was oral, it was verbal discussions. You may have some notes here and there, right? Not just emails, but maybe notes on the events. I'm not talking about your private notes or private business, but when it comes to your job to ensure the security on Parliament Hill.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's important to provide the context as to how fast and quick this was moving throughout the entire period. For me to have taken time to take the necessary notes was just not something that was within my timetable. So, again, I'm committed to looking back through, and I'm more than willing to provide anything that I can find back.
Thank you.
merci, Monsieur Broxson.
Thank you, Mr. Broxson, and thank you to all three for the work that you're doing.
And I will pass the floor to you and claim my 5 minutes. Mr. Brookson, are you aware of the attacks on the Prime Minister's residence in July 2020 by an active member of the military?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I am.
When such attacks and threats are posed to the Prime Minister of this country and federal ministers, are you briefed on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the notification of that incident was made almost immediately to the service, and the service responded accordingly to increasing its posture until that incident at the Prime Minister's residence was dealt with.
Something to be taken very seriously.
Absolutely.
And are you aware that a released, over the course of the fall, a report from the Internal Counter-Terrorism Report revealed that at least 4 federal ministers, cabinet ministers, were subject to specific violent extremist threats in the lead up to the Ottawa convoy occupation in January? Were you aware of that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not alive to any of the specifics of those incidents. No.
So, if there is a specific threat on the Prime Minister and 4 cabinet ministers, Mr. McDonnell, are you apprised of these threats?
Yes.
So were you aware at that time that the internal reports for the counterterrorism had identified the Prime Minister and 4 cabinet ministers as being subject to ideologically motivated violent extremists?
I don't recall specifically, but likely I had conversations with contacts in the security community about the security of certain ministers prior to, during, and post convoy.
Okay, help me clarify that. You were made aware, or you weren't made aware, that there was the Prime Minister and 4 cabinet ministers who had specific threats related to the anti-government sentiment within this crowd through open source observation, as well as the calls for political violence against the government. Are you aware of those threats, yes or no, sir?
I would say yes. I can't definitely say which 4 ministers. If I would say yes, and you ask me which 4 ministers.
No, I won't be asking
but
that.
I would say a yes, because I have those conversations on a regular basis.
So, given this kind of increased direct threat, anti-government sentiment, calls for political violence as being justified, knowing what happened in January 6th, what steps would you have taken in addition to anything that you had already been proceeding on related to the actual occupation, but specific to ideologically motivated violent extremists? What additional steps and measures would you have taken to assure the safety and security of the Prime Minister and those members of Cabinet?
That falls under the relation of the RCMP, under the responsibility of the RCMP protective operations.
Is there any coordinated effort between the RCMP on those efforts and your?
It would be discussed. Maybe the movements of the ministers on and off the precinct would be discussed at a certain time.
Would there have been any direction from you to the Speaker, or from the Speaker to you regarding this?
No, I would apprise the Speaker if necessary, if we were doing anything different on the precinct.
Okay.
as a
Thank you.
result of the RCMP providing them protection.
Mr. Brookson, given your past experience and your assessment, would your assessment of the security of parliamentarian staff and your members include having a knowledge of the staffing levels of police? Would you, like you mentioned, 135 guns at any given time, 30% additional capacity, we can do the math on that, 150 folks or so. Would you also have a knowledge to how many police officers were present in Ottawa? Did you, on Wellington Street, directly in front of the precinct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no.
You had no idea how many officers were there?
Not the exact numbers, no.
Given your own internal threat assessments on the security of the precinct, would it not make sense that you would have at least some kind of insight into understanding about the capacity of the Ottawa Police in front of the Parliament on Wellington Street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was alive to the increased numbers that were being brought in to a certain degree, but what their daily posture was, that was not something that was that I was informed of.
Would that information have helped you at all in making assessments on whether or not you had the appropriate staffing on the precinct to protect against the possibility of a surge and a breaching of the Parliament?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my responsibility is to ensure that the service can act on its own. Although I rely heavily and I appreciate the support that I get
For 90 minutes.
For 90 minutes from my partners. What I have full control over is the 421 protection officers that I'm responsible for.
Thank you. Concludes my round. We will now go on to, I thought I was safe, by the way, Mr. Fortin, when you gave me this.
It is the case.
Right.
Stop.
Safe to stop talking. Okay, I appreciate that. We'll now go on to Senator Boniface. Senator Boniface, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
It'll be Senator White.
Okay, Senator White, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll try to do some rapid questions here. A couple of things, just so we're clear, Superintendent Brookson, the Emergency Act provided PPS with no new powers. At any time, are PPS members provided special constable powers under Section 7 of the RCMP Act?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no.
Was it considered in this case that possibly because of the incident and the invocation, whether or not the RCMP should provide Section 7 powers to PPS officers?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no.
Would it assist PPS if they actually had more powers to perform some of their duties, like arrest, beyond the powers they have now? And if so, what would that look like?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the current operational requirement for this service were well suited within our civil authority under the criminal code.
Would it change if you, thank you very much, Superintendent, would it change if you were to take over Wellington Street and you had an expanded precinct? Do you believe it would be necessary to gain a different level of powers or more powers to maintain peace in that area or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, Senator White.
Okay, last question. My understanding of there are reports that have been prepared in relation to closing Wellington well before the convoy, certain entry points onto the hill, and even response in relation to post-blast or what the impact of post-blast report. Are those reports in the possession of PPS and or Madame Lacroix?
Any of the threat risk assessments and reports that we work on are a coordinated effort between the three security partners.
Is it possible that we could have those shared with the committee, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think I have a couple of minutes left. I'll share it with my friend.
Thanks
Senator
very
Harder,
much,
the floor is yours.
Senator White, and I, on behalf of the committee, I think we'll miss your questioning.
Some will.
I'm not sure the witnesses will. I'd like to follow up on Mr. Brookson's description of his enhanced staffing on the Hill. You said 30%. Was that deploying your full 421 officer capacity?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no.
And what was the cost of the additional 30%, roughly?
I don't, through you, Mr. Chair, the costs incurred by the service during this period is something that I can get and provide to the committee, but I just don't have the number.
Fine. During the period of the occupation, we talked a little bit about the harassment of staffing of senators and members of Parliament's office, and indeed senators and parliamentarians. What about your staff? Were they harassed, and and assaulted in any fashion that you could share with us?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No direct implications, but it was a period of time that was extremely difficult. We're talking about PPS employees that were working 10, 11, 12 days in a row to ensure, I mean, yes, we have 421 protection officers, but when you take into consideration the importance of spending time with family and having an adequate time for rest, it was a difficult operation to ensure the
And
numbers
was there any actions that you undertook post the occupation to deal with the special emotional or other circumstances your staff felt?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, Senator, and that's an incredibly important question to ask. The health and safety and well-being of our employees is something that the service takes as a priority. And so the engagement of the adequate counseling and what have you went on for an extended period of time.
I congratulate you for that. I think that's a very important role for you to play, and I'm grateful for your confirming that that took place. My final question is to all three of you. Did you ever feel that you didn't have appropriate situational awareness for you to be able to perform your mandated tasks?
I think that throughout we had enough coordination and a coordinated effort that I felt that I had the information I needed to make decisions and to brief up to make those decisions.
Mr. Brookson?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'll reiterate my lack of situational awareness of what was sitting on Wellington Street was my biggest concern and remains my concern to today.
And Mr. McDonnell?
No, I would say I lacked the situational awareness, on the anticipated actions of the Ottawa Police moving forward. That would have been good to know.
It does conclude the 5-minute round. I am unclear about the constitution of the three in-person senators in terms of the timing, but I do know that Mr. Carignan does have a 5-minute round. Ms. Boniface, were you changing the order, or would you prefer to have your rounds? Because you are on the list.
Oh, there you go. I still have time?
Yes.
Oh.
So
I'm sorry. When you indicated, I thought you meant that only one of us.
No.
Under the old rules.
no, we're back to my apologies. We are back to the original 5-minute rounds. You just so.
Would you like to let Mr. Carignan go
If
first?
you wouldn't
then
mind.
No, I'd be
that-
delighted.
I would
No,
like to do that.
no
Mr.
problem.
Carignan, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir.
OK, mais je peux donner.
I can give 2 minutes to Senator if she has questions.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Ah, OK, parfait.
Okay, perfect. Would it be possible to have notes? Because I'm surprised, because I was thinking that all three of you were taking daily notes on the activities of the day, on what was going on, what happened in the day throughout the night, that you were receiving reports, situation reports, that you had meetings between the three of you. You had meetings with police services, the RCMP, OPP, Ottawa Police. There were certainly notes that were made during these meetings because you had exchanges, email exchanges, again, between these partners, and also with different departments, with the City of Ottawa. So for all three of you, would it be possible to have copies of these exchanges and these minutes of the meetings and daily notes on the evolving situation?
Through you, Mr. Chair. What I can speak to is at the NCRCC as well as our Crisis Management Center that was stood up throughout the entire period here, that all the discussions and decisions were scribed, which means that notes were taken throughout those two. So that's something that we can look forward to provide to the committee.
OK, parfait.
Okay, perfect. And the email exchanges between yourselves and the different police services and yourselves and the City of Ottawa or the Mayor's office?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, the only thing that I'd be in a position to be able to provide the committee were dates and times that I had verbal telephone conversations.
OK. Et
Okay. So the same for our two other witnesses, Mr. McDonald and Ms. Lacroix.
I'm not sure how many notes, emails I've generated during that event. I will verify exactly how many there are. And before saying yes to your question, I will consult with the Office of the Law Clerk and Legal Counsel of the House of Commons.
parfait. Et
Perfect. And Ms. Lacroix?
consulter
Will you consult the same offices at the Senate? Yes, exactly. Okay, perfect. I have a question for Mr. Broxson. I'm looking into your expertise. I went on your LinkedIn page. I'm really impressed by your experience and your expertise in the field of operations especially. So the Emergencies Act, what did it provide in addition, according to you? Because you had good ideas when it comes to intervening, blocking certain streets. From an operations point of view, you have a certain idea about what could have been or should have been done. So the Emergencies Act, from an operational point of view, didn't provide much additional capacity to help free or liberate the street.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I can only speak to what my responsibility is for the Parliamentary Protective Service in that we're not a policing entity, and therefore the evocation of the Emergencies Act provided no additional authority for me. With respect to what it may have provided to either the Ottawa Police Force or the RCMP, that would be best to them to respond to.
OK.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much.
I have no more questions.
We will complete with a 5-minute round from Senator Boniface, and then I will need about 5 minutes or so after that just to do a little bit of housekeeping. So, Senator Boniface, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Brookson, I feel like we've been targeting a lot of questions your way, but I'm really thank you for your candor, which you've tried to answer them. So I'd like you to look at it from a perspective of hindsight. And given what you may have learned, if you were to start this exercise on day one, what would you hope for? And what do you think the benefits of that would be in terms of working with your partners?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think, Senator, and I appreciate the question. I think part of my objective in working with the policing partners is to increase awareness as to what this territory actually is about, and the sensitivity of it and the importance of the people that work here. And I think we've made quite a bit of an advancement on that. And again, looking back, just to have the authority of what I'm responsible for would be something that I wish I would have had prior to this event starting.
So authority in the context of Wellington Street itself? Or the ability, or can I suggest, or perhaps given what you had to work with at the time, enough influence to have that decision go a different way?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think part of my disappointment is I thought I had more influence than what I actually did with the policing partners. I'll have to talk back with them on that one. It saddened me throughout. I mean, I was before the Liberal caucus, and I got to tell you, my heart sunk in looking at the eyes. At the end of the day, parliamentarians are just human beings. And to suggest that people have to come to work and be under that sort of level of torment, irrelevant where it's coming from, was just something that just doesn't sit well with me. So I try to do the best that I can in leading the service to make sure that parliamentarians can come to work without feeling a sense of concern for their safety and well-being.
So in terms of what we can do, in terms of the committee, and we think of recommendations, it would seem to me that something like an MOU, which clearly lays it out with commanders at a sufficient enough level in your policing partners to be able to pick up the phone and call, and so that the message that you're trying to give is heard, and they have a good understanding of what you do, would be far down the road than what you were faced with when this process started. Am I correct on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely correct, Senator Boniface. When we look, there was a couple moments when I had 2 public order teams under the authority of the service, and that happened for the first time ever. And that was a public order team from the OPP as well as one from the RCMP. And I think it was a bit of a shift too on those partners as to who would have control. But I've said from the onset in working out this critical incident program for the services that I will never relinquish the authority of protecting this ground to another even if it's a law enforcement agency. So we've made leaps and bounds of how serious we are and where we're at in our readiness. And that's starting to come into the fold on having that confidence. And you would know better than most as to what it takes in that policing world and mindset to relinquish that authority of their own assets.
They have to have confidence in you and the resources that are leading them.
Correct.
That's correct. So in terms of any recommendations, if I may, Mr. Chair, any recommendations as you leave us from this table that you think would be helpful? I think the committee members would be interested in those, because when this committee finishes, you will have made some steps, and so it would be very helpful for us to know whether there's other gaps as you make those steps that would be of help. And thank you again for your service.
Thank you. That does conclude the round of questioning. I want to take this moment on behalf of the committee to thank you for your incredible public service. I know that you were put in a tumultuous time, and we certainly look forward to providing whatever supports we can from this committee on recommendations moving forward. At this time, you are now free of your obligations here before committee. I do need about 5 minutes of committee time just on some housekeeping items, and I want to thank you again for your attendance here. So I just wanted to make a quick reference to members of this committee. I want to flag, not for discussion or debate, but I just want to put as a chair a serious concern I have on scheduling regarding communications that we receive both from the OPS and from the OPP about their unwillingness to appear before this committee until they're appearing in front of the judicial review. I'm of the opinion, and I'll just state it, that I don't think that it's within their purview to pick and choose the priorities, and particularly to deprioritize this committee in this way, I find to be very problematic. I'm going to leave that with committee, and we can revisit it at a future date to get a sense for the timing. As it stands now, we're working through the scheduling. We want to make sure that we have a full work plan, and we want to make sure that we have witnesses lined up for future sessions in a way that'll be of the benefit of this committee. Ms. Bindian?
I believe there was a suggestion that we attempt to get Mayor Watson here as quickly as possible, and I was just wondering if there was any update.
We're looking now towards the end of the end of October, if I'm, no.
Mr. Watson was confirmed for Monday.
I thought it was the end of... It's the end of October.
Yeah.
So, we're in a situation where, given the seriousness of this committee, witnesses are making a commitment and then not availing themselves. I do reference the power of this committee in our parliament to send for people documents and evidence, and I take that seriously. We don't have to delve into that now, but I think that there's going to have to be some process for this committee if we want to get this work done in any kind of way. But to wait until after the judicial inquiry is not sufficient.
But perhaps, Mr. Chair, we don't need to park this for a future debate. I think, there may be agreement in the room that the clerk simply go back to say that is not an acceptable justification, and that the committee is insisting on their appearance. I don't know.
I am full support of that, actually. So, do we have that as a? Okay. With that being done, and before Mr. Varani, before you leave, it is a good. It's a good opportunity just in this moment right now, if I could, if there's ever an argument to maintain Senate, it's for the caliber of senators like Mr. Vern White. I want to take this moment on behalf of the committee to thank you for your service. And that is on the record and not out of camera. Mr. Varani, wanted to give you the opportunity. If anybody has the opportunity to, get to know Vern, it's been an absolute pleasure. The richness and fullness that you brought in your questioning was to the benefit of all Canadians across the country. I thank you for your service. I know it's a thankless job. I thank you for your service, and I wish you all the best in your next endeavors. Yeah.
No meeting Monday.
There is no meeting Monday. We're gonna celebrate Vern on Monday. No,
Just to clarify before we go, we have witnesses lined up for Thursday, or you're working on that?
we're working on it.
Okay. Working on it slowly. Okay.
Avant qu'on
Before we end our meeting, I ask our clerks, Mr. Palmer, and I think the documents in the digital binder should be better identified, better marked. Of course, it's not your fault, Mr. Palmer, or our clerks, but I would appreciate personally that if there was a better way of identifying it, like with the date or the document type, who submitted the document at what point in time, so that we can do a better job of studying these documents with the lists and the names, because otherwise it's very hard to make the connection between a document titled only document, but it might be an email, it might be a letter, a report. So I just want to know if the committee is having the same issues working with the documents that are provided, or maybe I'm the only one. I would like for the documents to be better identified so that we can do the linkages as necessary. And maybe we can ask the people who are producing the documentation to receive additional documentations, because we have already received 1,000 something pages. We keep receiving documents from the same organizations, CBSA or others. We have to establish the connections between these documents. Are these modifications to documents already submitted or to other documents? So I think people producing the documentation should reconciliate everything so that they only submit one document. It will be a lot easier for everyone to work with. And apologies for taking this time, but one final point. We talked about this last week. The redacted documents issue. So I think it has to come with justifications. I don't know what you think about this, but I think that we have to ask the people producing the documents to produce these documents without the redactions, or if they have to do any redactions, there should be an explanation to every redaction that they carry out, so that we have an idea whether that was a right call or not, because otherwise we have no way of knowing.
And we are recognizing that the time is beyond our allotted time. Senator Carry-On, we do have, we will open it up for you.
Very quickly, I do agree with my colleague, Mr. Fortin. I also want to know the following. See, the documents to be published on the website of the committee, has that been done already? Or if not, when will it take place? Because are these documents publicly available even though they're not published on the website?
I just want to reference for the members the volume of information that our clerks are having to deal with. They are working through it, and they're hoping to have it in due course. But this is a pretty serious undertaking, and I don't know that we have the administrative resources to keep up with just the volume of things that we're requesting. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just to go along with Mr. Fortin's comments about redactions and the reasons behind redactions, Mr. Brock, Senator White, and myself know from the court experience, when you do redactions, especially in the drug world, you have to give explanations to every redaction you have on every document you submit. And there's usually a template that goes with that explains, okay, redaction A, for example, was for these reasons,
Yeah,
and
Mr.
A is standard, right? And
Mr. Motz, I do want to reference that I think that is something that you had, or somebody had seeked to remedy via a motion. And I think at the
Yes.
appropriate time, we can deal with that motion and have that debate. I just don't think that that's the time right now.
I know you want to get going, but I just like to sit and chat for a while. My flight has been delayed, so it's all good.
Well, we're trying to get Senator White off the hook here. He's been on the clock now, 15 minutes overtime. Okay, thank you, and thank you to the interpreters and to the staff who worked through the technical difficulties. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.